Is 30 years enough time between reads? Hey friends, after reading Stephen King's latest book, Fairy Tale, I thought it would be fun to revisit a classic King book and kind of compare the experiences between the two. Now, I didn't know at the time that picking Cujo right after Fairy Tale was kind of a fun thing because dogs play such key roles in both books. And there are characters, for example, Gary Purvier in Cujo, who's very similar to Howard Bowditch in Fairy Tale. Now, if you haven't read Fairy Tale yet, I'll forgive you for not knowing the references. I just thought it was funny. Not really anything that goes substantially deeper than that, but the two books have some of the same kind of vibes in certain areas. But other than that, I think, they're very different books. And very different in the way that Stephen King tells the stories. In Cujo, he's firing on all cylinders. Here's a guy with a very ambitious story, fleshing it out to all its dimensions. And in Fairy Tale is a little bit, looser. But this isn't a video comparing the two books. This is a book review of Cujo. Some good classic King. Now, like I said, I hadn't read it for 30 years. I read it once back when I was sub 20. So reading it again after that much time has passed is as close to a fresh read as you're going to get. And so it was like I kept King book fresh and special from way back in the day. And I have an opportunity to do that again with Firestarter because I never actually read that book. So it's almost like I was saving the little treat for years in the future. That I'd like to say that I was trying to foresee the time when I would run out of King books and I wanted to save one like a squirrel saves a nut. But it was just that I started the book and didn't really dig it. And I didn't have a good edition of it, so I stopped. But I'm going to give that another read. Or I'm going to give it a read. Not another one, because you can't read it again if you didn't read it once. And do a review on Firestarter. But anyway, so I talked about Fairy Tale and Firestarter. Am I going to talk about Cujo ever? Yes, I am. Cujo is almost eerily a retelling of Jaws in some ways, in some very key ways. Both books have an extramarital affair as a key plot point. Both books feature people who are really out of place and don't belong where they are and question where they should be. They both feature an animal not behaving normally, as these animals do. And they both have kids on the menu. Now, I'm not going to tell you if Cujo orders that item from the menu, but kids are in danger in both books. And there are small town versus big city vibes that are also a big element of Cujo and Jaws. And King plays those up even more in this book. It's not just an emotion or a wistful thinking of the past. It is real tension between where the people are living and the lives they're running from or the lives they left behind. Anyway, Cujo, if you didn't know, and this is going to be spoiler free in that I'm not going to tell you what happens to who or whom. But I am going to talk about big plot points that I'm sure you all know about. It's been a while. But Cujo features a dog that gets bit on the nose by a bat, goes rabid, and then just causes all kinds of chaos. And chaos means blood. He loosens blood from a lot of people. And it is really graphic violence that I didn't remember, but there's some pretty graphic violence in this book. And I never thought of Stephen King as splatterpunk, and it definitely isn't splatterpunk. But there's some gnarly, woof, Woof. Essentially, the book is about these two families that are joined together by this tragedy of Cujo. Cujo is the centerpiece, and there are tethers connecting to two different families. And more specifically, this is a story about mothers and sons. Both mothers in this book are struggling with the decisions they made in the past and how it reconciles with their present, but they're also terrified for the future, in particular the future for their sons. And Cujo knocks it all loose for everybody. He's a free radical, just bouncing around and causes huge disruptions. And it's interesting how both families react to the violence, to what's going on, how both fathers react. And it like all good horror or sci-fi or any good fiction, it becomes a study in human behavior. And is it believable? Are people reacting in ways that you're rooting for, hoping for, and also railing against? Because there's plenty of behavior in this book and how the humans treat each other and how they deal with what's going on. That's very frustrating and exciting and horrifying. King also throws in a small sliver of the supernatural into this story. It's not a whole lot, and he could have played it up to greater effect, but he didn't. But it's there, and it's the chilling sort of vibe that I think really solidifies this as a Stephen King story. It doesn't feel like a creature story. You know, I guess in the 80s there was a huge run of books that featured animal attacks. Jaws, of course, Cujo, a book called Alligator by Shelley Katz. These books were hugely popular, and they kind of flared in and out of existence as trends do. There were no TikTokers back then. Am I right? So trends did last a little longer and did demand a little more of our attention span. Damn these kids nowadays with their TikTokers! I'm calmer than you are. And one thing I was struck with, considering a lot of the book centers on a mother and son beset and besieged by this rabid 200-pound St. Bernard, I didn't feel the claustrophobia I expected to feel. The mom and the son are trapped in this car, a tiny Pinto hatchback. Tiny cars back in the day were a lot bigger than the tiny cars we have now. But they were trapped in this small, suffocating car on some of the hottest days in a summer in Maine. And I didn't feel it like I should have felt it more. You should feel the sweat trickle and the air gets stiff in your chest. And I think the reason why I didn't feel the claustrophobia as much is because King spreads the narrative around. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's the father trying to save his business. The one mother and son are visiting her sister out of state. And you're bouncing around to all these different perspectives. So you don't really spend a lot of time in the car with Donna and Tad and their struggle. You get out of there and you get to see what's going on with other people. And I think one thing I loved about Gerald's Game is that King never left that room. He did. You could escape via the main character's mind and as she recalled her memories, but you were always there. You always knew you were handcuffed to a bed, and the helplessness and fear and tension and suspense never left you. You didn't really get a break. I would love to have seen what King would do with this book now if he never left that car. If every moment of this book, when the mom and son are trapped in the car, that King stayed with them for the duration, I think it would have been a much more tense book. As it is, it was a great read. I had a lot of fun. It was a stark difference between classic King and new King. It's easy to see why people devoured his books. It's a page turner. You always care about what happens next. You're always horrified when what next happens, and you can't wait to get to the end. And I'd say the ending of this book was satisfying, in many regards, but it was not a happy ending necessarily. Or, I don't know. I don't want to spoil anything for you, so I'm going to kind of be ambiguous. But I think it was a satisfying ending in the narrative choices King made. So thumbs up for me. I'm glad I revisited it. It makes me want to revisit all these King books, to be honest with you. But I think the next classic King I'll read will be Firestarter. That's been an oversight of mine for many, many years. I just had this crappy Broken Spine book club edition that I tried to read. And it was probably like 2 years old, but it was already yellowed pages and garbage. And I'm like, that affects the reading experience if you think the book's going to fall apart while you're reading it. So I wasn't mightily invested in that. So I'm gonna check that out. A benefit of waiting 30 years in between reads is that new editions come out, and punk-ass me didn't have this book when I read it the first time. This is the PS Publishing edition they put out, I think, last year, months ago. And it has Glenn Chadbourne art, and it's loaded with Glenn Chadbourne art because that guy just can't put a pencil down. And when he does put it down, he puts it down on paper, and up comes a drawing. And it is signed by Glenn Chadbourne, Sarah Pinborough, and a facsimile of Stephen King's signature. I got to read the intro by Sarah Pinborough because she's amazing. And I don't ever read intros or anything I think that's going to flavor my read of this story. So I always read them afterwards. But I think it's worth noting what editions you read. I talked about how horrible it was to read Firestarter when a book was falling apart. It affects the read, man. So getting the best edition you can tolerate handling without worrying about devaluing your collection, I recommend that. Getting the best book you can to read the book, it will only heighten the experience. That's it for this book review. You could leave your thoughts down in the comments about what you thought of Cujo and rabies. Is rabies, like, I kind of thought rabies would be a bigger thing growing up, just like quicksand and all the other things that that used to be tropes. Alum that made your mouth shrink real small, made things shrink. I just thought rabies was going to be something. I know Paul Tremblay did a book with rabies in it, Survivor Song, I believe. So I got to read it. But it's like, really? You're worried about rabies? Oh, how 1980 was that? So that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you reread the old books that made you readers, because that's what makes us readers. The great stories that get you hooked and keep you coming back to the same genre, the same author, or just devouring everything in the library. Revisit those old books. Maybe don't wait 30 years, but maybe do, because it was fun to reread it. And maybe I'll watch the movie again. But I don't mix my media. Stay frosty. I guess I should mention that I give the book 4 stars. I didn't say that anywhere else in the video. And now I'm editing it, so I'm just dropping this in here.